Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference channel. My name is Jesse Day. The next VRIC is coming up January 19th and 20th at the Vancouver Convention Center. It is completely free of charge to attend, so click the link in the description below to get your tickets today. And in the meantime, we're bringing the VRIC to you, of course, each and every week with our series of expert online panels. We have a fantastic one lined up for you today. It's Todd Horwitz of Bubba Trading and Doug Casey of International Man, two people I always love talking to. We're going to be covering a variety of topics. Of course, we're going to be discussing Trump being elected as president. What does it mean for the economy and financial markets? Is the broad market in a bubble? Silver, gold, all of that good stuff. Gentlemen, it's great to have you both on the show.
Hey, Jesse, it's great to be back with you. I look forward to it, and I look forward to talking to you and Doug for the next little bit.
Same here.
Well, let's start off with the results of the US presidential elections. What are the implications here of a Trump presidency for markets, the economy, and the overall health of the United States? Todd, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the Trump election is great for the economy, as I think you can see by the action in the markets. I think it's great for the United States. I do believe that out of all the presidents we've had, despite his sometimes pompous attitude, he is by far the best for this country because he's really running it more like a business instead of over flooding the government with too many employees, too much crap, and too much garbage. I think that we should have the mass deportations that he wants to have. I think we should build a wall. As a taxpayer, I'm sick and tired of paying for illegal aliens or illegal immigrants to be in this country. I think he's going to be very good. I think it's going to be good for oil. I think it's going to bring down the prices. I think it'll be good for inflation because I think the biggest one of the biggest reasons we have so much inflation is the price of oil, because oil is involved in about 80% of the products that we use, whether it be shipping to the store, putting in your car, or making the plastics that we use for even your little water bottles that are supposed to be green for the environment. So I think overall, I think he's a great choice, and I think that he'll do a great job, especially because this time there is no second term. This is it. He's got to do his thing, and I believe that his ego wants him to go down as a great president over anything else, and I think he does have the Americans' best interest at heart.
He certainly has come out swinging, so we'll have to see if he's able to implement a lot of the policies that he would like to. Doug, your thoughts on Trump being elected president, what it means for markets, the economy, and the future of the country?
Well, I generally agree with Todd. Frankly, more important than Donald being elected is that Kamala, I'm pronouncing it in the Spanish cognate way, which means how bad in Spanish, that Kamala wasn't elected because this was a horrible, horrible woman who had ingrained socialist and statist values. So it wouldn't matter who was elected as long as it wasn't her. Of course, on the other side of the coin, almost half of the country voted for this horrible woman, despite the fact that she's obviously a totally unqualified candidate with values that are antithetical to those that are traditional of America. Looking at Trump, I think he's going to show much better judgment than he did during his last 4 years when he showed terrible judgment with the people that he surrounded himself with. They're all neocons and political hangers-on and flatterers. Things are getting off to a much better start this time by saying that Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo are out. Good riddance. You can't be anywhere near these poisonous people. And he's putting in RFK Jr. to straighten up the FDA. I'd like to see it abolished. Joel Salatin, an old friend of mine, the lunatic farmer, is going to be involved in the Department of Agriculture and hopefully get rid of most of its 100,000 employees. He's talking about Ron Paul having something to do with monetary money things. Elon Musk, who says he's going to cut about $2 trillion. So yeah, this is all really good. I'm very pleased.
Quick break here, guys. Today's episode is brought to you by Copernico Metals. Now, regular viewers of my channel will be familiar with the entrepreneur behind Copernico. His name is Ivan Bebek. Now, although a young man in this business, Ivan's already created tremendous value for his shareholders in the past, namely with Caden Resources, which he sold to Agnico Eagle, and Keegan Resources, which became a mine now owned by Galliano Gold. Now, Ivan has surrounded himself with expertise from BHP, Newmont, and BRICS on his board at Copernico Metals. Check out copernicometals.com. Now back to the interview.
Well, let's talk about the state of the broad market at the moment. We've seen the S&P, NASDAQ, and Dow Jones, along with Bitcoin, surge to new all-time highs post-election. There's been a lot of talk leading up to this point about how overvalued the broad market is, how much of a bubble we're in, that it's going to burst at any moment. Now it seems to have defied those expectations, at least for the moment. I wonder what both of your thoughts are here. Do you think a Trump presidency changes anything in regards to the trajectory of the broad market? Todd, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the market is slightly overvalued, but we have to take into consideration the money supply. They continue to put money into the system, and that money is going to go somewhere, and it's really just an inflationary bubble versus anything else. I mean, I do think that the markets have a sell-off coming at some point, but again, I've been on this for about a year thinking that we're going to see a 50, 60% haircut, so this has not changed. I thought that if Donald Trump won the election, the market would rally, and then we'll see. Then I thought they would pull back. I thought if Kamala won, they would sell off right away. Again, it's hard to say that we're in total bubble territory because of the amount of money that is in the system. The Federal Reserve has done such a horrible job at these interest rate cuts and dealing with the markets. They forgot that free markets and asset classes will pay themselves if you let the markets work. They've chose not to let the markets work and really allow. I mean, if you look at the market participation, it is really just probably the upper 10% that is actually investing. We've seen a big decline in volume over the last couple of years. We've seen a big decline of participation. Even the middle class is in a recession. This is where we get into the funny point. We are in a recession if you're among the middle class. I mean, there are places in this country that if you're making $150,000 a year, you can't live but paycheck to paycheck. So, and with the average income of $43,000, it doesn't sound real well unless you're in the upper 10% of the population. So I think, again, calling it a bubble, I think 90s, the internet was a bubble. This is a little bit different, but I still think probably overvalued. But we do have that one big key here, which is the oversupplied money that has been put into the system, which has created the inflation. But when you look at from spending power, the Dow could go to 80,000. People are still not going to have money to really live day to day. And I think that's the bigger problem.
Yeah, that's a very interesting distinction between the growing gap between the haves and have-nots in a lot of Western societies around the world, and that upper percentage driving the markets. Doug, I wonder what your thoughts are on the current state of the broad market.
Well, the market is overpriced by all standard parameters. And I really have no interest in being in the stock market and zero interest in being in the bond market, which is a triple threat to everybody's capital. The inflation risk, the currency risk, the default risk. As far as what Trump is going to do, he's always said, and I believe him, that there's some good things about Trump, which I just pointed out a moment ago. Bad thing about Trump is that he's always said that he's a low interest rate guy and that he's the king of debt. I think what that means is that to the best of his ability, he's going to keep pumping up the money supply. And of course, with the government running $2 trillion deficits, we'll see if Elon can do anything to reduce that or not. They could only finance that by selling it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve puts up currency, deposits it in commercial banks, and then the government spends it. I'm afraid that inflation will continue to get out of control with Donald, because we have these gigantic deficits. I hope he can get rid of them, but if he can't, they're just going to have to keep printing up more money. And there are other scary things about Donald. He wants to put on much higher tariffs, up to 100% in the cases of countries that don't want to accept the dollar, which is to say half of the world's population, the BRICS countries. And that could really be the catalyst that brings on a total collapse of the world economy. Because if those people can't sell to us, they don't have the money to buy from us either. It's what happened with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs back in 1929. So that there's some real dangers out there with Donald, because he doesn't have a good grip of economics at all. He's a businessman. That's good. But when it comes to actual economics, he gets failing grades in many ways.
Yes, I would tend to agree with you there, just based on hearing him talk about it. I would like to touch on gold here, as well as silver, energy. When it comes to basically the whole commodities complex, we have actually seen prices drop. This poor silver stackers, now we're back to just over $30 once again, after rallying to nearly 35 when everybody thought, here we go, we're on our way back to new all-time highs. What are your thoughts there when it comes to gold, silver, and commodities in general? Energy also taking a hit. Do you think we could see more downside up ahead? And would you look at that as a buying opportunity? Todd, what do you think?
Well, I think that the sell-off in gold and silver were natural. I mean, we were so overbought from an extension. I mean, if you looked at the chart, I mean, they were going parabolic. Now, the markets in either direction, especially commodities. Commodities are not stocks. They're not going away. They don't have earnings to worry about. They have production. And I think that you saw a massive rally that took us over 2,800 in gold. It took us up in over $35 in silver. You're getting a natural pullback. I think you're looking for a buying opportunity. I said last week on my call that I thought that 2,600 was really in play for an opportunity to come in and buy silver or gold. I think that $30 is a spot to buy silver. I think that they're going nothing but higher over time. But markets are not healthy when they go straight in one direction. They have to have, as they call it, backing and filling. Some sellers have to come in, some profits need to be taken to allow new money to come in and new buyers to want to chase to the market. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing. I think that even Bitcoin up by 5,000 again. I mean, we're up over 80,000. I wouldn't be surprised if next week you would see Bitcoin at 70,000. There's going to be a pullback. When you come back here, you have to understand the complexion of markets and how they work. And they work between buyers and sellers and price discovery. And at some point, the buyers are loaded up and everybody's chased them as far as they can go. And then they look and there's no buyers to be found. They have no one to sell to. So the markets will drop. I think we saw that in gold. I think we saw that in silver. I think you'll see it in Bitcoin. I think you see it in all commodities that get overpriced at a certain point, because there's a certain price and there's an old saying in the commodity space: high prices will cure high prices and low prices will cure low prices. And I think right now we're seeing the high prices cured first. I think they're very bullish. They're very great opportunities, but you have to look for where is a spot for you. And the other thing you have to remember is, and I'm a big buyer of physical metals, not paper metals, because I don't think there's enough gold in the world to cover the amount of paper that is written on it. But if you're buying physical metals, that means you're buying it with money that you can afford to hold on to. Because if you're forced to sell it, if you're buying it with money you don't have and you get forced to sell it, you're not going to get the price or the appreciation that you want. That is what too many people believe. They try to buy in at the hot stock, the hot commodity, and they want to get rich, when this is not a get-rich-quick business. This is a business of understanding value and where is the greatest likelihood and the greatest probability of movement in your favor.
Very well said. I just want to follow up with you quickly before moving on to Doug, and that is regarding the energy space, because you mentioned earlier that you think a Trump presidency might bring oil prices lower. Is that because of his drill baby drill mentality, that he wants to continue to increase domestic oil and gas production? And could that be bearish for oil prices in the long term? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it is bearish for oil prices. And here's the trick. And I did not know this, but I researched this and found this out, that we produce more oil last year than ever before. Unfortunately, we're shipping our oil to China and other places and not using it ourselves, although it's heavier oil. There's a whole refinery thing, but let's forget about that. And we're buying from OPEC and Saudi Arabia, the criminals that want to steal from us. So because of all the political BS that goes on and the perks that our government gets by buying and making us overpay for oil. Remember, when Trump left office, crude oil was at $35 a barrel. Okay, we need to rebuild our refiners and bring back and use our own oil. I mean, the United States is one country that could be totally self-sufficient. We could be an island. We don't really need the rest of the world. Okay, we could be self-sufficient with what we have here. I mean, we have at current usage over a 300-year supply of oil right now. Okay, we have an abundance of natural gas. I think when Trump gets in and we start dealing with OPEC in the right way, which is telling them to go, you know what? I think that prices are going to drop down, and I think we'll see oil come down. I don't think that'll make the profits of the oil companies come down because they'll be producing more and they'll be making more on quantity versus trying to deal with what's going on. And I think that is the bigger issue. I do think that oil will come down significantly because I think that is the big cure for the inflationary and for the flaws of the Fed with their rate cuts, which is going to do nothing more than increase inflation.
And Doug, your thoughts on gold, silver, energy, and the commodities complex in general? How do you see it positioned here?
Well, from a long-term point of view, I continue to be very bullish on gold. Why? Because it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability, with the possible exception of Bitcoin, which I think is gaining more and more credibility all the time. And I'm afraid that the dollar is in a death spiral. It's an IOU nothing on the part of a bankrupt government. And it's very nice that we're experiencing mourning in America under Trump for a while, but mourning only lasts for 6 hours. And the unsound fundamentals under the economy will reassert themselves. The main thing with gold is it's not what the traders do in New York or what the public does in the U.S. Public in the U.S. is still totally uninterested in gold. It's what the other central banks in the world, besides the Fed, are doing. And they don't want to hold on to dollars. They realize that the dollar is a hot potato issued by an out-of-control bankrupt government. So they're selling their dollars and they're buying gold. They need an asset, and that is gold. So I continue to be a bull on gold. I continue to be a bull on silver as well, because when the public does get the bit in its teeth, silver is the poor man's gold, and it's a much, much smaller market than gold. There's not a lot of inventory. All the gold that's ever been mined is still above ground. Not true with silver. So it's got a lot more upside potential. And as far as oil is concerned, hydrocarbons are the only intelligent way to get power these days, with the exception of nuclear, of course. But they're not doing anything on nuclear currently. So I think oil consumption is going to continue going up. I'm bullish on oil, much more bullish on natural gas. Relative to the price of oil, it's very, very cheap. So that's how I'm playing energy. I'm playing it with natural gas and also uranium, because nuclear really is the safest, the cheapest, and the cleanest form of mass power generation. And reality will eventually come out. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Are you sure, Doug, that they'll ever see reality in this country?
Well, no, that's true, because we have to remember almost half of the people in the country voted for Kamala, so maybe they won't.
Hey, Jesse, can I ask Doug one quick question?
Of course.
Doug, I have a belief that there's a potential that we may need gold and silver as a currency again someday, especially listen, I think if Trump does a great job, maybe he can solve some of the problems. But if we don't continue what he starts, then the dollar, as you've said, is nothing but a mountain of debt. Okay. And I am of the belief that at some point we may need gold and silver as a currency again to actually trade and buy goods and services. Do you have any thought to that?
Totally agree with you. Gold is going to be reinstituted as a currency, not just between countries, uh, because the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians, they don't want to use each other's funny money to trade with each other, and they certainly don't want to use the dollar either. So they're going to go back to gold, and it has to be at a much higher price, I think. And I'd love to see gold being used again, as it was before 1933, in the US and all over the world. In fact, I'd like to see all these stupid central banks abolished. They serve no useful purpose. They're just
Amen, brother.
inflation. So no, I'm in complete agreement on that, Bubba.
I think the central bank should be gone as well. I'm with Ron Paul there. If we're not going to eliminate it, at least have a true and honest audit, which we never get.
No, that won't happen.
No.
Absolutely. I want to touch on some other commodities here. Doug, you did mention uranium. Todd, I'm wondering what your thoughts are there. Uranium equities, another absolute roller coaster of volatility. As somebody with a lot of my portfolio allocated to uranium, it's very interesting to log in one day and check your account and everything's down 5%, up 5%, down 10%, up. It's just, it's crazy. But the long-term fundamentals, as you were saying, Doug, regarding nuclear buildouts, although there's not a ton of action happening right now, the supply-demand fundamentals seem very favorable. Todd, what are your thoughts on uranium? I know you also cover agriculture, wondering how you currently see agriculture. Any thoughts on fertilizer, and any other commodities out there, copper, that you've got an eye on?
Well, I think Doug is 1,000% right on uranium. Again, I don't have a big exposure to it. I have a little. I'd like to have more. I just haven't really gotten around to it. But I think he's 1,000% right. I think this is the difference: uranium and nuclear power versus EV and electrical power. We could go to nuclear power easily. Okay, that would not be a problem. The electric problem is impossible because we don't have the power grid. We're not set up for it, and they'd have to do too much work to get it there. Plus the fact that nuclear is better and greener, easier, and better to use. But again, I'm not the scientist. I'm not the government who wants to rip off their patrons and add all these taxes. So to uranium, I think it's great to own. I think you should have some exposure. It is a wild commodity. It does fly around. It's very similar to palladium that goes up and down like a yo-yo. But overall, I think that will be a direction that I think will be forced to head in the future. As far as other commodities, I think the grain markets are going to have a big up move here at some point soon. Listen, we've got troubles in the economy. The grain markets have been under pressure, but I think we're going to call this the inflation trade, Jesse, with the Fed cutting again, which is a totally moronic move, cut rates once again, because the 10-year notes, the day they cut on September 18th, 10-year notes were 3.4%. Today, they're 4.4% with a 75% basis point cut from the Federal Reserve, telling you that all they're doing is clearing the room for the banks to make more money. But I think we will see more inflation, and I think we'll see these grain markets, which have been under tremendous pressure. To me, the grain markets are almost like putting money in a bank account, okay? Because it's such low prices in comparison to the rest of the markets and the rest of the commodities that they can only go higher from here, and there's very little risk to the downside. I think that when you look at OJ, or orange juice is extremely overpriced. I think that's already had the inflation trade coffee somewhere mid-range. Cocoa was higher, came back a little bit. But I think in general, buying commodities at value prices like the grain markets, I think are a very smart investment now before everybody decides to get on it. Because just one bit of information on the grain markets, the shorts are holding the biggest short position since 2019. Now, at some point when they stop going down, those shorts are going to be forced to cover. I'd rather be long when they're forced than trying to catch on to them when they go. But I do think commodities itself are going to have, as we call it, the inflation trade, because I think inflation is going to go way out of control once again. No fault of Trump, but I think that, again, because of what the Federal Reserve has done, because they're trying to get their debt reset, because of all these other factors, I think we're going back to a very swift and high inflation. And if they can tell me 3.1 all they want now, we're north of 10%. I think we're going back to north of 20% inflation.
And Doug, your thoughts on any other commodities you've been watching? Also, any follow-ups to the
Absolutely.
inflation comment as well?
I totally agree with Bubba. He's absolutely correct. Absolutely on the grains in particular, and on the rate of inflation, which is much higher than the phonied up numbers that we get out of the government. I don't really believe U.S. government numbers much more than I believe the numbers of the Argentine government. I happen to be in Argentina right now. I spend a good part of the year down here. One other commodity that that people hate, you're supposed to hate it, but I like it a lot, is coal, and especially a lot of coal stocks, particularly in Australia. A lot of these stocks down there, coal stocks, are yielding 10, 15, close to 20% dividends. And I think coal is going up. It's until we get nuclear going, it's the way you generate electrical power. It's not with windmills and solar panels. They're very nice for isolated, specialized operations, but for mass power generation for industrial economy, they're totally absurd. So until we go nuclear in a big way, coal is the answer. And it's underpriced. The coal stock's underpriced. So I'm long a lot of coal and natural gas and grains. Those are the commodities that I'm most favorable towards.
Yeah,
Well,
very interesting thoughts on coal there as well. There was a huge run up in a lot of the coal stocks, I believe around 2020. But I've heard a lot of people echo your sentiments that they're still very undervalued. Obviously, high dividends, and coal isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
The institutions, now all this ESG and DEI stuff, hopefully is going to be tamped down, maybe even go away under Trump. So the big institutions almost can't own coal stocks. They're just too hated. They're too politically incorrect. That can change. So I think there could be a lot of buying that comes into the coal stocks. I think they're going higher.
I hope you're right. They're too damn woke. This is disgusting what's happening, because what they're doing, the wind, everything else, that can't produce enough power to blow my nose, as they say.
And it's uneconomic in addition to that.
It's horrible. And not only that, but just think about if we went back to coal and used the jobs that it would create in this country. I mean, again, we forget about the important part, that people have to work and have to make money. No matter if you're so worried about the environment, okay, first of all, I don't believe in the climate change, but let's say you do. If you're so worried, you gotta have
I
people
don't.
working
No, I don't. It's a scam. It's a giant
That's what I
scam.
said.
You're right, Bob.
That's what I said.
Perhaps there's no greater poster child for failed green energy efforts than Germany. We've seen Germany's government collapse. I'm going to read a quote from The Guardian. Germany's three-way coalition has collapsed after 3 years following a lengthy dispute over how to stop a multi-billion euro hole in next year's budget, plunging Europe's largest economy into a period of considerable uncertainty. Now, following this, there were complications announced around finding enough paper in the country to print ballots to hold an election, things currently in limbo. How did the greatest industrial power in Europe get reduced to this? Doug, I'll start with you this time.
Wokeism on steroids. Look, Europe is a sinking ship. It's a morass of socialism. And Germany in particular, large companies there have to have workers on their boards of directors, practically have to have them in management. The government, if not the federal government, it's the state governments in Germany own significant shares in these corporations, German corporations, and influence. They do. Employment is what they're all about, not making profits or good cars or whatever it is. No, Germany has been totally captured by socialism. And in addition to that, they've got these problems with migrants and welfare. No, I think it's the place is aging out. Uh, the great post-World War II German economic boom is over, and I don't know when things are going to get better there. I'm bearish on Europe in general and Germany in particular.
And Todd, your thoughts on the collapse of the German government, and what do you see the future of the EU? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I agree with Doug again. I think that he is 100% right. Now, we can actually start with blaming the central banking system because central banking started in Europe in 1600, okay, which is stole from their people since the 1600s. And of course, eventually, socialism or communism, you run out of money and you end up with serfs, and you end up with the oligarchs, which is exactly what has happened. Once again, I think that they're too woke. They're too free with their money to try to buy votes and to create that socialism atmosphere. Which, again, if anybody understands communism or socialism, you want it. If you're among the rich, you want socialism or communism because you're never going to suffer. You're going to only benefit from that because without a free market, there is no competition. Very similar. I mean, look what Facebook and Meta did. I know Meta and Google did here in this country. They went to the government asking for regulations so that nobody could compete with them. When you go to Germany, they've got the same problem and they've destroyed a country. And I believe the euro currency, listen, I thought the euro currency is going to go back to about 88 cents, where it was in about 1999 or 2001. Whenever it came out, it load out at about 88 cents. I think they're going back there. I think they've got tremendous problems, tremendous debt. And I think they've got huge issues over there, which we've witnessed over the last 2 years, although they continue to ignore and not pay attention to them. Because, of course, we know that the people that are poor or down below don't get the same respect as those who have the money. And they're just getting absolutely blitzed down there. And I think it's only going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, and Germany perhaps a very big canary in a coal mine for the rest of the EU. I wanted to touch on the inflation question here because both of you believe that inflation is going to come back with a vengeance. Now, it's never really gone away. I think that a lot of things people misunderstand is that when inflation is going down, it doesn't mean that prices are going down. It means that they're going up at a slower rate. So when politicians say we've got inflation down, well, it's still incredibly unaffordable for the vast majority of people. At what point do you see civil unrest breaking out in Western nations because of excessive inflation? I mean, I'm in Serbia where prices are incredibly cheap compared to back home in Canada. That being said, they're still expensive for the people here. But when I go back to visit Canada, I'm literally blown away by prices in the grocery store. It's insane. $10 for a can of yogurt, $10 for some eggs. It's really obscene, I guess is the only word I could use. So if it goes even higher than that, I can't imagine what your average person is going to experience with their, inability to live their lives day to day. Is this going to lead to social unrest? Todd, what are your thoughts?
I think there is. I've thought all along that we would have another revolution or another civil war in this country. I think that first of all, the government doesn't give you fair answers. They give you a CPI number which only counts 4% for food and energy. Well, anybody knows that other than an emergency throughout any given year, your food and energy is a lot more than 4% of your budget. That's number one. Okay. Number two, they don't care, and the prices never come down. They've always used a shortage in coffee. Starbucks. Has Starbucks ever dropped the price of a cup of coffee? Well, I mean, coffee runs from $3 to $1, but yet they've never come down. So I think that the people, but here in this country right now, we're still way too woke. Everything's okay. They're living in their parents' basement. They're living off the government dollar. They're living off welfare. They're living off food stamps. So they don't argue. They just say, okay. And of course, I've never seen more homeless in this country. I mean, I live in Las Vegas now, and I got lost there. They drove through an area. There must have been 2,000 homeless people running around. Okay. And again, this is very common, but again, take the biggest state in the union, California, no bigger wealth disparity in that state from the very wealthy to the extremely poor. There you go. That's what shows you the democratic state where the government wants to spend money, create higher inflation to get more tax dollars from you. And of course, they don't really care about the middle class because that doesn't affect them. And the middle class, for some reason, continues to vote for them.
Yeah, some very interesting thoughts. Doug, your take on what a resurgence of continued inflation could do to the middle class, and if you see that leading to any kind of civil unrest.
Well, Lenin was absolutely correct when he said that the middle class will be ground between the millstones of inflation and taxation. And middle class in the Western world is in a world of trouble at this point. Meanwhile, the rich guys who control these governments, powerful people, they love the printing of money by these central banks. Why? Because they and the big corporations get it first. They're standing right next to the fire hydrant where this money comes from. So they get it first. They get to as much as they want, and they get to spend it at the old values. So it's big trouble. And Trump, the election of Trump, and is throwing some sand on the slippery slope that middle class civilization is sliding down on. But I'm afraid the long-term trend is still in motion because, 100 years ago, well, before World War I, states in the West took 5 to 10% of the economy to do what they wanted to with, and the income tax didn't exist. Most governments lived on import duties and excise taxes and had very small budgets. But now, throughout the West, especially in Europe, governments are taking 40, 50% or more of the economy. When is that going to change? Well, with the revolution, perhaps. And it may start here in the US because the red people and the blue people actually hate each other. They can't talk to each other. They have totally different worldviews. And I don't know how, but you're not going to change the minds of these wokesters that have been indoctrinated by generations of going through public schools. And so I remain pessimistic, at least for the next 10 years or perhaps more. On the other hand, the average person is wired like a squirrel. He's wired to produce and save his production. That builds capital. That's good. And science and technology will continue advancing, hopefully at the rate of Moore's law. So short term, I'm really bearish. Long term, in terms of civilization going to the stars, yeah, but that's a long time in the future.
Yes, and as you mentioned with wokeism and where everybody's head is at from an ideological standpoint, I saw some interviews with an ex-CIA operative, and he said that the easiest way to manipulate people is to tap into their ideology. There is no more powerful motivator. It's very difficult to change, and obviously very easy for politicians to tap into and manipulate as they see fit. I want to end on talking about, this is kind of a following up on what you were saying, Doug, this talk of the collapse of the West, the end of Western hegemony, and the rise of the BRICS nations. We obviously saw the BRICS summit in Kazan. A lot of people were speculating there would be a gold-backed currency announced. There was not, disappointing many. What are your thoughts on that summit, on the continued growth of the BRICS nations? Do you ascribe to that view that the West is falling and the East is rising? Obviously, a simplified way to put it, but are the BRICS nations posing a threat to Western hegemony moving forward? And Doug, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, there are about a dozen things that I could point out that were originated by the West and even today are almost unique to the West. A belief in freedom of speech, a belief in free markets, a belief in the rule of law, a dozen things like that. And the West is discarding them, and the BRICS world doesn't really have them. So it makes me pessimistic for the world in general, quite frankly. But as far as the BRICS are concerned, and their currency in particular, it's inevitable that they will start talking about using gold. But 40% gold backing doesn't make any sense. In fact, having a BRICS currency doesn't make any sense. are they going to keep the reserves? Which one of these countries can't trust each other? They have different demands, and they still want to print up money because it's the best way for these governments to support themselves, in their opinions. The only way around this is just to use gold as money. To hell with currencies, to hell with central banks. I think that'll happen someday, and maybe Bitcoin will get to the gold before gold does. But no, a BRICS currency, yeah, they might start it, but it won't last long. I mean, I'm just surprised that the euro has lasted as long as it has, but it's going to dry up and blow away as well. You know, if the dollar is an I owe you nothing, the euro is a who owes you nothing. So it's going to go away. And I hope NATO goes away too. It outlived its usefulness when the Soviet Empire fell back in 1990. So a lot of changes are coming.
Yes. And Todd, your thoughts on the potential rise of the BRICS, gold-backed currencies, and everything that's been happening
I don't
there?
have any chance. I think that Doug is right. I think that the only true currency is something that is backed, gold, silver, that's real. Bitcoin, I do believe, is real. I don't think it's real as it's running away at the moment, but I do believe it's real. I think that the true cryptos will be, there should be, when it's all said and done, probably 3 or 4 that are legitimate currency. But again, that's one of the ways, you know, you can't, if you're leaving, for example, a communist country, you can't walk out with 1,000 ounces of gold, okay? But you can walk out with a flash drive. So I think that, again, I think it's just a bunch of rhetoric, you know, I've been trading for 46 years. For 30 of those 46 years, the dollar is not going to be the reserve currency anymore. The dollar is not going to be. Again, one of the problems that every other nation has is we owe everybody so much money that if they argue, then we can devalue. And then where do they get their money? You know, it's the old story. If you owe a bank 5,000, they own you. If you own 5 million, you own them. Well, we're in charge because we owe everybody so much money and so much debt. What are they going to do? Okay, that's really what it comes down to. But I do believe that we need a better system. I believe we need a Federal Reserve. I believe that the Federal Reserve gets in the way. I don't think they're truly a private corporation, but if you go back to the con game that Paul Warburg, Rothschilds, JP Morgan, and the Rockefellers played on the government when they put it instituted in 1913, you could see it was a shell con game to begin with. I don't understand it, but here we are still dealing. And of course, that's what causes the inflation and the lack of money. And of course, we go into the political side. All the states that are high tax states are always asking for more money and are always broke. The states that don't have taxes never ask for any more money. It's an interesting dichotomy when we look at the whole thing. This goes to the BRICS nations. I think they have no chance to do what they're trying to do. I think it's just noise, as always, because again, until further notice, the United States is in charge.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a fantastic conversation. Todd, tell us about Bubba Trading, what it is you do there, and where people can find it.
Well, Bubba Trading, we teach people how to trade. I trade live futures with my members every day. We have educational programs and basically information. I love to teach people. I love to make them better because, listen, trading is not easy. It's a hard business. Okay, it's a grind business. There is no get rich quick schemes. You need to get a good, solid education and learn about it. And listen to guys like Doug because he's pretty smart.
Great. Well, I'll put a link below to Bubba Trading. And Doug, tell us about International Man, what it is you do there, and where people can find that.
Well, it's a free blog that comes out every day. I write an article every week, and lots of other smart people write articles too. Like my friend David Stockman writes an article every week. So everybody ought to go to internationalman.com and opt in. I think you'll find it worthwhile and enjoyable. And I also have a podcast on YouTube called Doug Casey's Take, which is fun. Okay, that's my commercial. Oh, and I've written 3 novels with my friend John Hunt, Speculator, Drug Lord, and Assassin, which are intended to reform those 3 unjustly besmirched occupations. They're very radical. So go on Amazon and pick those up. You're in for a good read. That's my commercial.
Well, I'll put links to all of that in the description below as well. Gentlemen, thank you once again for coming on. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it.
Thanks, and thanks.
Thanks, Doug.